The first thing I noticed walking into the quarterly company meeting was Monica's laugh echoing across the mahogany conference room. Sharp, theatrical, designed to carry. She stood at the center of a cluster of executives, her red blazer commanding attention like a beacon. I counted 12 people hanging on her every word, each probably earning more than my annual project management salary. My name is Sayra, and I had been Monica's younger sister for 28 years, though sometimes it felt like I'd been her understudy for longer than that. She gestured dramatically as she spoke, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Morrison account was everything I hoped it would be, she declared, her voice carrying that familiar mix of confidence and performance. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and take the leap. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I shifted uncomfortably near the presentation screen, checking my laptop for the third time. My project, 18 months of market research, consumer analysis, and strategic planning for the Morrison expansion, was reduced to slides Monica would present in 15 minutes. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally standing in her shadow. Gabriel Martinez, our senior vice president, approached the podium. He was a thoughtful man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness that had earned him respect across all departments. I had worked with Gabriel on 3 major projects, and he'd always given me credit where it was due. Today felt different. Before we begin our quarterly reviews, Gabriel announced, I want to acknowledge some outstanding work that's come to my attention. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Monica before finding me. Sayra Chen's comprehensive analysis of the Morrison market segment has been instrumental in securing our largest client expansion to date. The room fell silent for exactly 2 seconds before polite applause filled the space. Monica's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. She clapped enthusiastically, her rings clicking against each other. That's my sister, Monica announced to the room, her voice warm, but somehow claiming ownership. Always the researcher, always behind the scenes making sure everything's perfect. She walked over to me, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. Sayra's always been the detail person in our family. The phrase stung, because it was both true and reductive, detail person, as if my 18 months of strategic thinking could be summarized as organizational housekeeping. After the meeting, I retreated to my office, a modest space with a view of the parking garage compared to Monica's corner office that overlooked the city skyline. I reviewed the Morrison files for the dozenth time, tracing the timeline of late nights, weekend research sessions, and breakthrough insights that had made the expansion possible. My phone buzzed. A text from Eli, my oldest friend, who worked 2 floors down in IT support. Heard Gabriel mention your Morrison work. Finally. Want to celebrate after work? Maybe, I texted back, still processing. Eli had been watching Monica eclipse my contributions for years, sometimes more frustrated about it than I was. He'd encouraged me to speak up, to claim credit, to stop letting family dynamics bleed into professional recognition. But Monica wasn't just my colleague, she was my sister, and the balance between supporting her success and advocating for my own felt impossibly delicate. I was still staring at my computer when Monica knocked on my doorframe. She entered without waiting for permission, settling into the chair across from my desk with the casual confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. Great meeting today, she said, crossing her legs. I'm glad Gabriel finally noticed your work. Finally? I looked up from my screen. I've been submitting monthly reports for 2 years. You know what I mean. Monica's tone remained light, but her fingers drummed against the armrest. Sometimes you have to make sure the right people see the right information. I've been talking to Gabriel about your potential. The word potential hung in the air like a challenge. After 6 years at the company, my potential should have been evident in results, not conversations Monica had on my behalf. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I think the Morrison results speak for themselves. She leaned forward, her expression softening into what I recognized as her concerned big sister face. Sayra, you're brilliant at analysis, but you're terrible at office politics. People need to see you as more than just the person who compiles data. The data generated 18 million in new revenue. And that's fantastic, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes you have to take the leap.
After she left, I sat in my office watching the sunset over the parking garage. Monica's words circled in my mind, each repetition sharpening their edge. The implication was clear. Without her intervention, my work would remain invisible. Without her guidance, I would remain invisible. I thought about the Morrison analysis, the breakthrough moment at 3 a.m. when I'd realized the market segmentation everyone else missed, the weekend I'd spent modeling different expansion scenarios, the satisfaction of watching my recommendations become reality. That work belonged to me. The recognition, delayed as it was, belonged to me, too. But Monica's shadow was long and familiar, and stepping out of it felt more terrifying than staying hidden. The industry awards announcement came on a Tuesday morning, buried in my inbox between expense reports and meeting confirmations. The Pinnacle Excellence Award for Strategic Innovation, the most prestigious recognition in our field. I almost deleted it, assuming it was general industry spam. Then I saw Gabriel's forwarded message at the top. Sayra, thought you should know about this. The Morrison project would be perfect. Application deadline is next Friday. Let me know if you want to discuss. G. I read the email 3 times, my coffee growing cold as the possibility settled over me. The Pinnacle Award wasn't just recognition, it was career-defining validation. Previous winners had gone on to senior executive positions, started their own consulting firms, been featured on magazine covers. It was the kind of achievement that rewrote how people saw you, how you saw yourself. My phone rang. Monica's name flashed on the screen. Did you see the Pinnacle Award announcement? She asked, without preamble. Gabriel just forwarded it to me. Gabriel forwarded it to you? There was a pause, followed by Monica's familiar laugh. That's interesting. I was thinking about applying myself. My stomach clenched. Of course she was. The Morrison project had been my work, but Monica had presented it to clients, had her name on the final reports, had become the public face of its success. In the company's official records, we were co-leads on the project. What would you submit? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Well, Morrison, obviously, though I've been thinking the Henderson merger might be stronger, or the Carlyle restructuring from last year. Each project she mentioned had my fingerprints on it, my research, my analysis, my late-night breakthroughs that had made the successes possible. Those are all good options, I managed. The thing is, Monica continued, her voice taking on that familiar big sister tone, these awards are as much about presentation as substance. You know how these industry panels work. They're looking for someone who can represent the company well, do interviews, speak at conferences. The implication stung because it was expertly crafted to sound supportive while being fundamentally dismissive. Monica was better at client presentations, more comfortable with public speaking, more naturally charismatic in professional settings. But underneath her diplomatic phrasing was the assumption that my work needed her performance to be truly valuable. I should probably let you go, she said. I want to start outlining my application tonight. After she hung up, I sat staring at Gabriel's email. The Morrison project would be perfect. Not Monica's Morrison project, mine. Gabriel had worked with me directly on every phase of the analysis. He'd seen the original insights, the methodology I'd developed, the strategic framework that had made the expansion successful. He knew whose work it really was. For the first time in my career, I had a choice to make that couldn't be smoothed over with family diplomacy or professional deference. I could apply for the award myself, claiming credit for work that was genuinely mine. Or I could step aside, watch Monica add another achievement to her growing list of successes, and wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. I opened a new document and began typing my application. 3 days later, I was still working on my submission when Eli stopped by my office. He had been my sounding board through every stage of the Morrison project, the person I'd called at midnight when I'd figured out the market segmentation breakthrough, The friend who'd celebrated each milestone with me over coffee and increasingly expensive bottles of wine. "How's the application coming?" he asked, settling into the chair Monica had occupied earlier that week. "I keep second-guessing everything." I gestured at my laptop screen, covered with draft paragraphs and revision notes. "Monica's right about the presentation aspect. These awards go to people who are comfortable in the spotlight."
Eli leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sayra, I've watched you present to clients. I've seen you explain complex analyses to executives who barely understand basic statistics. You're better at this than you think you are. But Monica is good at talking about other people's work." His voice sharpened with frustration he'd been holding back for months. "She's good at taking credit for insights she didn't have and strategies she didn't develop. That doesn't make her more qualified for this award." I'd never heard Eli speak so directly about Monica, and his bluntness was both shocking and oddly liberating. For years, I'd been so focused on being a supportive sister that I'd lost track of being an advocate for myself. "You think I should apply?" "I think you should win," he smiled, the tension leaving his voice. "But first, you have to actually submit the application." That night, I worked until 3 a.m., crafting a submission that traced every phase of the Morrison analysis, from initial market research to final implementation. I included the strategic frameworks I'd developed, the consumer insights that had shaped our approach, the financial projections that had convinced the client to move forward. For the first time in my professional life, I was telling my own story without Monica's interpretation or presentation layered on top. The application deadline was Friday at 5 p.m. I submitted mine at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the cutoff. My hands were shaking as I clicked send, partly from caffeine and partly from the terrifying exhilaration of finally stepping into my own light. I didn't tell Monica I'd applied. I told myself it was because I wanted to focus on the quality of my submission without the distraction of family dynamics. But honestly, I wasn't ready for another conversation about presentation skills and industry politics and all the reasons why my work needed her performance to be truly recognized. 2 weeks later, the nomination list was published. Both our names were on it. The company-wide meeting where the nominations were announced should have been a moment of triumph. Gabriel stood at the front of our largest conference room, speaking to nearly 200 employees about our industry leadership and innovative work. When he mentioned that 2 of our team members had been nominated for the Pinnacle Excellence Award, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. "Monica Chen and Sayra Chen," Gabriel announced with obvious pride. "The first time in our company's history that we've had multiple nominees for this prestigious award." I was sitting in the third row, trying to process the surreal reality of hearing my name called alongside Monica's, when I noticed the murmur rippling through the room. Colleagues were turning to look at us, Monica in the front row, me several rows back, with expressions of curiosity and something that looked like confusion. After Gabriel finished his remarks and dismissed the meeting, people began approaching to offer congratulations. The conversations felt strange, performative, as if everyone was trying to navigate the awkwardness of sister versus sister competition without acknowledging it directly. "Congratulations on the nomination," said Vivian Walsh, a colleague from the marketing department who'd always maintained professional distance from both Monica and me. "It must be exciting to be recognized for your individual contributions." The emphasis on individual wasn't subtle, but it was the first acknowledgement I'd heard that our nominations represented separate work rather than shared achievement. Monica materialized at my elbow with the timing of someone who'd been monitoring every conversation. It really is unprecedented. Though I have to admit, I'm a little surprised Sayra applied. She's usually more comfortable working behind the scenes. The comment landed like a paper cut, small enough to ignore, sharp enough to sting. Several colleagues nodded knowingly as if Monica had articulated something they'd been thinking but hadn't said aloud. "Actually, I've been wanting to take on more public-facing projects." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but not untrue. The Morrison analysis was just the beginning. Monica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly.
Of course, I just meant that this kind of industry recognition comes with expectations. Interviews, speaking engagements, representing the company at conferences. It's a big step. I'm looking forward to it, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The conversation continued around us, but something had shifted. Monica's comments weren't protective big sister advice anymore. They were professional positioning, an attempt to frame my nomination as ambitious overreach rather than earned recognition. Later that afternoon, I was reviewing quarterly reports when Monica knocked on my office door. This time, she didn't sit down. "We need to talk about this nomination situation," she said, closing the door behind her.
What about it? Sayra, this is awkward for both of us. People are already gossiping about sister rivalry and family drama. It's unprofessional. I looked up from my computer. What are you suggesting? Monica sighed, settling into the chair across from my desk with the air of someone preparing to deliver difficult but necessary truth. I think you should withdraw your nomination. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to misunderstand or soften with alternative interpretation. Withdraw? Look, I know you worked hard on Morrison, but let's be realistic about what these awards really measure. It's not just about the quality of the work, it's about industry leadership, public representation, the ability to articulate complex strategies to diverse audiences. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Those aren't your strengths, and that's okay. We all have different talents. My application was accepted by the selection committee. They thought my work was worthy of recognition. The selection committee gets hundreds of applications. They probably didn't realize we were related, didn't understand the family dynamics that might make this competition inappropriate. The phrase family dynamics was doing a lot of work in her sentence, transforming my professional achievement into a personal complication that needed to be managed rather than celebrated. Monica, I spent 18 months on the Morrison analysis. Every strategic insight, every market segmentation breakthrough, every financial projection, that was my work. And I presented it beautifully, she replied without missing a beat. I turned your research into client success. That's called teamwork. The casual dismissal of my contribution, the reduction of strategic analysis to research that required her presentation to become valuable, it crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore for years. Monica didn't see me as a collaborator or even a competitor. She saw me as support staff for her success. I'm not withdrawing. Monica's expression shifted from concerned to sharp. This is a mistake, Sayra. These awards aren't participation trophies. They go to people who can handle the responsibility that comes with recognition. Then I guess we'll see who handles it better. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with movements that were too controlled to be casual. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when this gets messy. After she left, I sat in my office watching the sunset over the parking garage, thinking about responsibility and recognition and the difference between earning something and being given it. For the first time in our professional relationship, I wasn't trying to make Monica's success easier or more comfortable. I was trying to claim my own. The industry dinner where nominees would be announced to the broader professional community was still 6 weeks away. 6 weeks for Monica to position herself as the obvious choice, to frame my nomination as family drama rather than professional recognition, to remind everyone why she was the natural leader and I was the natural support. But for the first time in my career, I wasn't planning to make her job easier. I was planning to make mine impossible to ignore. The first sign that Monica was taking our competition seriously came 3 days after our confrontation, when I discovered she'd scheduled a meeting with Gabriel. Not unusual in itself, except that she'd booked the conference room directly across from my office with glass walls that gave me a perfect view of their conversation. I tried to focus on my quarterly budget review, but my attention kept drifting to Monica's animated gestures and Gabriel's increasingly serious expression.
At one point, she pulled out what looked like a presentation folder, spreading documents across the table between them. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully, occasionally asking questions I couldn't hear, but could read in his body language. When the meeting ended, Monica caught my eye through the glass and smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd accomplished exactly what she intended. 20 minutes later, Gabriel knocked on my door.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sayra, do you have a moment? His tone was professional, but carried an undertone I couldn't quite identify. I wanted to discuss your Pinnacle nomination. My stomach tightened. Of course. Gabriel closed the door and settled into the chair Monica had occupied earlier that week. Monica shared some concerns about the potential for conflict of interest given your family relationship and collaborative work history. Conflict of interest? She's worried that having two nominees from the same family might reflect poorly on the company, suggest favoritism or internal politics rather than merit-based recognition. Gabriel's expression remained neutral, but I could see him weighing his words carefully. She also mentioned that your application might have overstated your individual contributions to some shared projects. The accusation hit like cold water. After 6 years of working together, Monica was questioning not just my qualifications, but my honesty. Gabriel, you worked with me directly on Morrison. You know what my contributions were. I do, he said quietly, which is why I wanted to discuss this with you personally rather than escalating it through HR channels. The phrase HR channels sent a chill through me. Monica hadn't just questioned my qualifications, she'd implied potential misconduct serious enough for warrant official investigation. What exactly did she claim I overstated? Gabriel hesitated, then pulled out a notepad. She mentioned the consumer segmentation analysis, the financial modeling for the expansion scenarios, and the strategic framework for client implementation. She suggested these were collaborative efforts that you've presented as individual achievements. I stared at him, processing the careful precision of Monica's attack. She hadn't accused me of lying outright, just of taking too much credit for shared work. It was the kind of allegation that was difficult to disprove and impossible to ignore. Gabriel, you worked with me directly on Morrison. You know what my contributions were. I do, he said quietly. Which is why I wanted to discuss this with you personally rather than escalating it through HR channels. The phrase HR channels sent a chill through me. Monica hadn't just questioned my qualifications, she'd implied potential misconduct serious enough for warrant official investigation. What exactly did she claim I overstated? She mentioned the consumer segmentation analysis, the financial modeling for the expansion scenarios, and the strategic framework for client implementation. She suggested these were collaborative efforts that you've presented as individual achievements. I stared at him, processing the careful precision of Monica's attack. She hadn't accused me of lying outright, just of taking too much credit for shared work. It was the kind of allegation that was difficult to disprove and impossible to ignore. Gabriel, I have documentation of every phase of that analysis. Email timestamps, draft versions, my original notes and research. I can show you exactly what I developed independently and what came from team collaboration. I'd appreciate that, he said, his voice warming slightly. I want to make sure we handle this appropriately. After Gabriel left, I sat staring at my computer screen, fury and unbelief warring in my chest. Monica hadn't just asked me to withdraw, she'd tried to sabotage my nomination by questioning my integrity. My phone buzzed. A text from Eli. Free for coffee? You look like you could use it. I found him waiting in the lobby cafe, 2 cups already on the table, and an expression of barely contained anger on his face. I heard about Monica's meeting with Gabriel, he said without preamble. How did you... Vivian Walsh. She was in the elevator with Monica afterward, heard her talking on the phone about addressing the family situation professionally. Eli's jaw tightened. Sayra, she's trying to get your nomination withdrawn. I know. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. Gabriel wants documentation of my contributions. Good, because I've been keeping my own records. Eli pulled out his laptop, opening a folder labeled Morrison Project Archive.
Every email you sent me for technical support, every late-night call when you had breakthroughs, every time you asked me to review your analysis before presenting it to the team. The folder contained dozens of files, screenshots of our conversations, time-stamped emails, even photos I'd texted him of my whiteboards when I was working through complex problems at home. It was a comprehensive record of my work process, documented by someone with no stake in the outcome except friendship and fairness. "Eli, this is evidence," he said firmly. "Monica can question your contributions, but she can't argue with timestamps and documentation. This proves the work was yours."
I scrolled through the files, remembering each late night and breakthrough moment they represented. Seeing my process documented so thoroughly was oddly emotional, proof that my work had mattered enough for someone to notice and preserve. "There's something else," Eli continued, his voice dropping. "I've been thinking about Monica's other projects. Henderson, Carlisle, the ones she mentioned as potential award submissions. What about them? I provided technical support for those too, and the patterns are similar. Your analysis, your insights, her presentations." He leaned forward. "Sayra, I think she's been taking credit for your work for years." The possibility hung between us, both obvious and devastating. Looking back, I could trace the pattern. Projects where I'd done the strategic heavy lifting while Monica handled client relationships and public presentations. At the time, it had felt like natural collaboration, playing to our respective strengths. But viewed through the lens of credit and recognition, it looked like systematic appropriation. "I need to be careful about this," I said slowly. "If I start questioning other projects, it looks like retaliation. But if you don't document the pattern, she'll keep doing it." Eli closed his laptop, his expression serious. "Sayra, this isn't just about the Pinnacle Award anymore. This is about your entire career." The department meeting where we would preview our award applications was scheduled for Friday afternoon, 5 days before the final submission deadline. Gabriel had positioned it as an opportunity for feedback and support, but everyone understood it was really a dress rehearsal for the industry presentation 6 weeks later. Monica was scheduled to present first. I arrived early, claiming a seat in the back row where I could observe without feeling observed. The conference room filled quickly, nearly the entire leadership team plus colleagues from related departments who'd worked on our projects over the years. When Monica took the stage, she commanded attention effortlessly. Her presentation was polished, visually striking, and strategically crafted to highlight her most impressive achievements. She spoke about the Morrison project with the confidence of someone who'd lived every detail, describing challenges and breakthroughs as if she'd experienced them personally. "The key insight," she said, advancing to a slide that showed consumer segmentation data, "was recognizing that traditional demographic categories weren't capturing the real purchasing patterns. We needed to dig deeper, to understand the psychological and behavioral drivers that influence decision-making." The "we" was technically accurate. We had worked together. But listening to Monica describe the breakthrough as a shared epiphany, rather than acknowledging my specific analysis, felt like watching someone else receive credit for my thoughts. Her presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause. Gabriel thanked her and called for questions. Vivian Walsh raised her hand. "Monica, can you walk us through the methodology for the behavioral analysis? That seemed like the foundation for everything else." Monica's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The methodology was comprehensive: multiple data sources, statistical modeling, consumer interviews. The important thing was synthesizing all that information into actionable insights. It was a perfect non-answer, deflecting the technical question towards general strategy. But for someone who'd supposedly developed the analysis, her response was surprisingly vague. Then it was my turn. I'd spent the week rebuilding my presentation from the ground up, using Eli's documentation to construct a narrative that was both detailed and defensible. Instead of broad strategic overviews, I focused on specific methodologies, technical innovations, and measurable outcomes.
The Morrison analysis began with a problem everyone recognized but no one had solved. Traditional market segmentation wasn't predicting consumer behavior accurately enough to justify major expansion investments. I walked through my research process step by step, the literature review that identified gaps in existing models, the statistical techniques I'd adapted from academic research, the consumer interview methodology I designed to capture psychological drivers that surveys missed. I continued by saying the breakthrough came when I realized we were asking the wrong questions, and showed a slide that compared traditional demographic data with my behavioral clustering. Instead of asking who our customers were, we needed to ask why they made purchasing decisions. The room was quieter than it had been during Monica's presentation, but the attention felt more focused, more engaged. I could see people taking notes, following my logic, understanding the technical complexity behind what had appeared to be intuitive insights.
When I finished, the applause was more subdued, but somehow more genuine. Gabriel nodded approvingly before asking for questions. Vivian raised her hand again. Sayra, that behavioral clustering methodology, is that something you developed specifically for this project? Yes. I adapted techniques from behavioral economics research, but the specific application to consumer segmentation was new. I advanced to a slide showing my original framework. I've actually been thinking about publishing the methodology, since it could have broader applications. That's impressive, said David Chen, our CFO. How long did the development process take? About 4 months of initial research and testing, then another 6 months of refinement as we applied it to Morrison. I caught Monica's expression in my peripheral vision, surprise mixed with something that looked like irritation. For the first time, people were hearing the technical details behind work she'd presented as collaborative intuition. After the meeting, colleagues approached me with questions about methodology, implementation challenges, and potential applications to their own projects. The conversations were different from the congratulations I'd received after the nomination announcement. More substantive, more focused on the work itself rather than the recognition. Gabriel approached as the room emptied. Strong presentation, Sayra. You've clearly put a lot of thought into documenting your process. Thank you. I have to ask, that behavioral clustering framework you mentioned publishing, is that something you've discussed with Monica, given her involvement in the project? The question was carefully neutral, but I could hear Gabriel working through the implications of individual versus collaborative contributions. The framework was my independent development, I said. Monica's expertise was in client relationship management and strategic implementation. Different skill sets, different contributions. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. Good to know. The clarity around individual contributions will be important for the award committee. As he walked away, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in our professional relationship, Gabriel was seeing me as separate from Monica. Not the detail person supporting her vision, but the strategist whose technical innovations had made her success possible. Monica was waiting by the elevator when I left the conference room. Interesting presentation, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Very detailed. I wanted to be thorough. You certainly were. She pressed the elevator button, not looking at me. I hope you're prepared for the scrutiny that comes with individual recognition. Industry panels ask tough questions. I'm looking forward to it. The elevator arrived and we rode down in silence. But for the first time since the nominations were announced, I felt like I was going up. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on Sunday, marked urgent, and copied to Gabriel and 3 other senior executives. The subject line read, "Clarification needed, Morrison project contributions and award application accuracy." Monica had sent a formal complaint. I read it twice, my laptop screen the only light in my dark apartment, trying to process the clinical language that systematically dismantled my professional reputation. She'd attached project timelines, meeting notes, and client correspondence, all legitimate documents that, when arranged strategically,
painted a picture of collaborative work where I had overstated my individual contributions. The complaint was masterfully constructed. Monica didn't accuse me of lying outright. She expressed concern about potential misunderstandings that might reflect poorly on the company. She didn't claim credit for my work directly. She simply documented instances where we'd worked together, leaving readers to draw their own conclusions about who deserved primary recognition. My phone rang. Eli's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me you've seen Monica's email," he said without preamble. "Just finished reading it."
This is nuclear, Sayra. She's not just questioning your nomination, she's trying to destroy your credibility completely. I walked to my window, looking out at the city lights that seemed impossibly distant. She's protecting her position. If I withdraw quietly, this goes away. If I fight back, it becomes a public spectacle that damages both our reputations. Except you have documentation that proves she's lying. I have documentation that proves I did the work. That's different from proving she's intentionally misrepresenting it. Eli was quiet for a moment. Sayra, you know this isn't just about the award anymore, right? If you let her get away with this, she'll know she can destroy any threat to her position. You'll never have another opportunity to claim credit for your own work. He was right, but the cost of fighting back felt overwhelming. Monica had positioned herself perfectly. If I defended my contributions aggressively, I looked defensive and unprofessional. If I withdrew gracefully, I validated her claims that I'd overreached. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. Gabriel will want to discuss this first thing. After Eli hung up, I spent the rest of the night reviewing every document Monica had attached to her complaint, cross-referencing them with my own records and Eli's archive. The picture that emerged was complex. We had collaborated extensively, but the intellectual breakthroughs that made the project successful were demonstrably mine. By 6 a.m., I'd constructed a response that was both defensive and offensive, acknowledging our collaboration while documenting my specific innovations. But sending it would escalate the conflict beyond any possibility of family reconciliation. Gabriel called at 8:30, asking me to come in early for a private meeting. I arrived to find him reviewing a thick folder of documents, Monica's complaint, my original application, and what looked like additional materials I hadn't seen before. "This is a difficult situation," he began without preamble. "Monica's allegations are serious, but your work speaks for itself. I've reviewed your documentation from last week, and the technical contributions are clearly yours." "Thank you. However," Gabriel continued, "the appearance of family conflict is becoming a distraction. The executive team is concerned about how this reflects on our company culture and professional standards." I felt the familiar trap closing around me, the suggestion that my presence, rather than Monica's accusations, was creating the problem. "What are you recommending?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "I think you should submit your response to Monica's complaint. Let the record show your actual contributions. But I also think you should be prepared for this to get messier before it gets resolved." "Messier how?" Monica mentioned that she might need to recuse herself from some projects to avoid appearance of bias. She's also suggested that family members shouldn't be eligible for the same awards in the same year, regardless of merit. The strategic brilliance of Monica's position became clear. By framing our competition as inappropriate family drama, she could withdraw from the immediate conflict while ensuring I was eliminated from future opportunities. She would appear magnanimous and professional, while I would be marked as the sister who couldn't separate personal relationships from professional advancement. "Gabriel, if I withdraw my nomination, this doesn't end. Monica will use this precedent to question my contributions to every future project." "I know." His voice carried a weight that suggested he understood more than he was saying. "Which is why I think you need to fight this. But you need to be prepared for the consequences." I looked at the folder of documents on his desk, thinking about the months of work they represented and the years of family relationship they might destroy.
What kind of consequences? Gabriel's expression grew serious. The kind that change everything. The HR investigation began on Wednesday morning with a knock on my office door from Patricia Williams, a woman whose professional smile masked the sharp intelligence that had made her the company's most effective internal auditor. She carried a leather portfolio and the air of someone accustomed to uncovering uncomfortable truths.
Sayra, I hope you have some time this morning. We need to discuss the allegations regarding your award application. I'd spent 2 sleepless nights preparing for this moment, organizing every document, email, and piece of evidence that supported my contributions to the Morrison project. But sitting across from Patricia, I felt the weight of institutional process pressing down on me, the machinery of corporate investigation that could reshape careers with clinical precision. I understand Monica has raised concerns about collaborative work being presented as individual achievement. Patricia began, opening her portfolio. I've reviewed her documentation, and I'd like to hear your perspective. For the next hour, I walked through my work methodically. The consumer behavior research that had taken 4 months to develop, the statistical models I'd built from scratch, the breakthrough insight about psychological purchasing drivers that had come to me during a weekend spent analyzing interview transcripts. Patricia took notes without expression, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed she understood the technical complexity of what I was describing. This behavioral clustering framework, she said, reviewing my documentation, Monica's submission suggests this was developed collaboratively during team brainstorming sessions. The framework itself was my individual work. The team sessions were about implementation, how to apply my analysis to client strategy. Can you document the distinction? I pulled out the evidence Eli had helped me compile, time-stamped emails showing my research process, draft versions of my analysis with creation dates, even photos of my handwritten notes from weekend work sessions. Patricia studied the materials carefully. This is quite comprehensive. Did Monica contribute to the development of this framework? No, Monica's expertise was in client relationship management and strategic communication. She took my technical analysis and translated it into presentations that clients could understand and act on. Different skill sets. Exactly. Both valuable, but distinct. After Patricia left, I tried to focus on current projects, but concentration felt impossible. The investigation process had transformed our professional relationship into something clinical and adversarial, reducing years of family and work history to competing documentation. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian Walsh. Coffee later? Want to discuss something important. I found Vivian waiting at our usual cafe, her expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. She'd always maintained careful neutrality in office politics, making her request for a private meeting feel significant. I need to tell you something about Monica, something I probably should have mentioned earlier. My stomach tightened. What about her? Last year's Henderson merger analysis, the one Monica presented to the board, I was the primary researcher on that project. Vivian's voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of long-suppressed frustration. I spent 3 months analyzing market conditions, competitive positioning, and integration challenges. Monica attended 2 team meetings, asked for my final report, then presented my conclusions to senior leadership as her recommendations. I stared at Vivian, processing the implications. Why didn't you say anything? Because Monica made it clear that challenging her would damage my career prospects. She had relationships with executives I couldn't access, influence I couldn't match. Vivian's expression hardened. But watching her attack you for doing exactly what you actually did, that's different. Are you willing to document this? I've already set my records to Patricia Williams. Henderson wasn't collaboration, it was appropriation. After Vivian left, I sat in the cafe processing what her revelation meant. Monica hadn't just questioned my contributions to shared projects. She'd been systematically taking credit for other people's work for years. The pattern Eli had suspected was broader and more deliberate than either of us had realized.
My phone rang.
Gabriel's name flashed on the screen. Sayra, can you come to my office? Patricia has some preliminary findings she'd like to discuss. I found them waiting with expressions that gave nothing away. Patricia had expanded her leather portfolio into multiple folders arranged across Gabriel's conference table. The investigation has raised some interesting questions, Patricia began, not just about the Morrison project, but about several initiatives over the past 2 years. Gabriel leaned forward. We've discovered a pattern of individual contributions being reframed as collaborative achievements, with credit concentrated towards certain team members. What kind of pattern? Patricia opened one of her folders. Henderson Merger Analysis. Primary research by Vivian Walsh. Strategic presentation by Monica. Carlisle Restructuring. Financial modeling by David Kim. Client presentation by Monica. Morrison Expansion. Behavioral analysis by you. Implementation strategy presented by Monica. The list continued, each project revealing the same structure. Junior colleagues did the technical heavy lifting, Monica handled the client relationships and presentations, and the official record credited her with strategic leadership while minimizing others' contributions. This isn't necessarily misconduct, Gabriel said carefully. Team leaders often present collaborative work, but the concentration of recognition is concerning. What does this mean for the award investigation? Patricia closed her folder. It means your nomination is valid and your contributions are documented. It also means we need to have broader conversations about how credit and recognition are distributed in this organization. And Monica? Gabriel's expression grew serious. Monica will be asked to clarify some discrepancies between her award application and the documented record of various projects. The investigation is expanding beyond your specific complaint. After they dismissed me, I walked back to my office feeling oddly hollow. I'd wanted vindication for my own work, but uncovering Monica's systematic appropriation of others' contributions felt like discovering something darker about someone I'd thought I knew. Eli was waiting by my desk, his expression mixing triumph with concern. He has some preliminary findings, he said. Apparently, Vivian Walsh opened a separate complaint about Henderson, and Patricia wants technical records for all the projects Monica cited in her award application. How deep does this go? Deep enough that Monica might lose more than just the award nomination. The emergency department meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, ostensibly to address collaboration and recognition protocols, but everyone understood it was really about Monica. Word had leaked about the expanded investigation, and the atmosphere in the conference room felt charged with the electricity of impending revelation. Gabriel stood at the front of the room, his expression grave. Behind him, Patricia Williams arranged documents with the methodical precision of someone about to present evidence in court. We're here to discuss findings from a recent investigation into project attribution and recognition practices, Gabriel began. These findings have implications for how we document contributions, allocate credit, and support professional development across our teams. Monica sat in the front row, her posture perfect, and her expression carefully neutral. But I could see tension in her shoulders, the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested she knew what was coming. Patricia will present the investigation summary, Gabriel continued. I want to emphasize that this process was initiated to clarify questions about award nominations, but it revealed broader patterns that require organizational attention. Patricia approached the podium with the confidence of someone accustomed to delivering uncomfortable truths to powerful audiences. Our investigation began with questions about the Morrison project attribution, she said, advancing to her first slide. However, our review uncovered systematic discrepancies between documented individual contributions and public recognition across multiple projects over a 2-year period. The slide showed a timeline of projects, each marked with primary contributors and public presenters. The pattern was unmistakable. Junior colleagues did the analytical work. Monica received the recognition. Henderson Merger Analysis, Patricia continued. Primary research and strategic recommendations developed by Vivian Walsh over 3 months. Public presentation and senior leadership credit attributed to Monica Chen.
Vivian sat straighter in her chair, her expression carefully professional, but with satisfaction visible around her eyes. Carlisle Restructuring, Financial Modeling and Risk Assessment, developed by David Kim. Strategic Implementation Plan, presented by Monica Chen, with attribution as lead strategist. David Kim shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing for the first time how his contributions had been reframed in official records. Morrison Expansion, Consumer Behavior Analysis and Market Segmentation Framework developed by Sayra Chen over 6 months. Client presentations and industry recognition attributed to collaborative leadership under Monica Chen. The room was completely silent now, the weight of systematic appropriation settling over colleagues who were recognizing their own experiences in Patricia's findings. This pattern suggests a consistent approach to leveraging individual contributors' work while concentrating recognition and advancement opportunities toward a single team member. Gabriel stepped forward. To be clear, team leadership and presentation responsibilities are legitimate roles. However, the attribution of strategic innovation and analytical breakthroughs requires more careful documentation of actual contributions. Monica finally spoke, her voice steady but carrying an edge I'd never heard before. I'd like to respond to these allegations. Of course, Gabriel said. Monica stood, smoothing her skirt with the controlled movements of someone managing fury. I've spent 6 years building client relationships, managing stakeholder expectations, and translating complex analysis into actionable business strategy. My role has consistently been strategic leadership and client management. She turned to face the room, her gaze sweeping across colleagues who'd worked under her direction. I've never claimed to be a researcher or technical analyst. My value to this organization is in leadership, communication, and strategic vision. That's not in question, Patricia said calmly. What's in question is the attribution of specific innovations and analytical breakthroughs to collaborative development when documentation shows individual creation. Every project I've led has been collaborative. I've guided strategy, provided feedback, shaped implementation approaches. Monica's voice grew sharper. If that guidance helped junior colleagues develop better analysis, then collaboration was successful. But the Morrison Behavioral Clustering Framework was presented to the Pinnacle Award Committee as your joint innovation. Documentation shows it was developed independently by Sayra Chen with no input from team leadership. Documentation can be misleading about collaborative processes. Patricia opened another folder. We also have recordings of client presentations where you described analytical insights in first person, using phrases like, "my research shows," and "I discovered," when referring to work performed by other team members. The silence that followed was deafening. Monica's defense had shifted from claiming legitimate collaboration to arguing that documentation was unreliable, a position that undermined her credibility rather than strengthening it. Gabriel cleared his throat. Monica, given these findings, we need to discuss your Pinnacle Award nomination and your role in future project leadership. Monica's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. I've spent 6 years building client relationships, managing stakeholder expectations, and translating complex analysis into actionable business strategy. My role has consistently been strategic leadership and client management. She turned to face the room, her gaze sweeping across colleagues who'd worked under her direction. I've never claimed to be a researcher or technical analyst. My value to this organization is in leadership, communication, and strategic vision. That's not in question, Patricia said calmly. What's in question is the attribution of specific innovations and analytical breakthroughs to collaborative development when documentation shows individual creation. Every project I've led has been collaborative. I've guided strategy, provided feedback, shaped implementation approaches. Monica's voice grew sharper. If that guidance helped junior colleagues develop better analysis, then collaboration was successful. But the Morrison Behavioral Clustering Framework was presented to the Pinnacle Award Committee as your joint innovation. Documentation shows it was developed independently by Sayra Chen with no input from team leadership. Documentation can be misleading about collaborative processes. Patricia opened another folder. We also have recordings of client presentations where you described analytical insights in first person, using phrases like, "my research shows" and "I discovered," when referring to work performed by other team members. The silence that followed was deafening. Monica's defense had shifted from claiming legitimate collaboration to arguing that documentation was unreliable, a position that undermined her credibility rather than strengthening it. Gabriel cleared his throat. Monica, given these findings, we need to discuss your Pinnacle Award nomination and your role in future project leadership. Monica's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. I've spent 6 years building client relationships, managing stakeholder expectations, and translating complex analysis into actionable business strategy. My role has consistently been strategic leadership and client management. She turned to face the room, her gaze sweeping across colleagues who'd worked under her direction. I've never claimed to be a researcher or technical analyst. My value to this organization is in leadership, communication, and strategic vision. Fine, she said, gathering her things. If this organization values technical analysis over strategic leadership, then perhaps I should reconsider my future here. She walked toward the door, pausing at my row. Congratulations, Sayra. You've destroyed our family relationship for a professional award. The accusation hung in the air after she left, the suggestion that I'd prioritize recognition over sisterhood. But sitting in that conference room, surrounded by colleagues who'd finally seen the truth about systematic appropriation, I realized Monica had it backwards.
I hadn't destroyed our relationship for professional recognition. She'd been undermining my professional growth for years, and I'd finally decided to stop enabling it. The reckoning had come, and for the first time in my career, I was standing in my own light instead of her shadow. The 3 days following Monica's confrontation passed in a strange suspension between vindication and devastation. HR had suspended her Pinnacle Award nomination pending further review, while mine moved forward with Gabriel's full endorsement. But winning felt complicated when the cost was exposing my sister's systematic appropriation of others' work. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Eli knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into the chair that had become our unofficial consultation space. "I keep waiting to feel guilty about Monica," I admitted, "but mostly I feel relieved that people finally know the truth." "You should feel relieved. What she was doing wasn't collaboration, it was exploitation." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Need to talk. Can you meet me at Riverside Cafe at 6? M." I showed Eli the message. He frowned. "Are you gonna go?" "I think I have to." "Want backup?" I considered it, then shook my head. This conversation needs to happen eventually. Better to control when and where. Riverside Cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, the dinner rush still an hour away. Monica sat at a corner table, looking smaller somehow, without her usual armor of professional confidence. She'd ordered coffee for both of us, a peace offering that felt familiar and strange. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. Her voice carried none of the sharp edge from Friday's meeting. Instead, she sounded tired, almost fragile. "Monica!" Let me start. I owe you an explanation. Maybe an apology, though I'm not sure I know how to make one that covers everything. I waited, surprised by her directness. "I never meant for it to go this far," she continued. "In the beginning, it really was collaboration. You'd do the research, I'd handle the clients. We'd both benefit from successful projects. When did that change?" Monica stared into her coffee cup. "Gradually. I started getting recognition for our joint work, and it felt good. People respected my strategic vision, sought my advice, wanted me on their projects." She looked up at me.
I told myself I was earning that recognition through leadership and communication skills. But you were also claiming credit for insights you didn't develop. Yes, the admission was quiet, but clear. By the time I realized what I was doing, it had become the foundation of my reputation, admitting that my strategic breakthroughs were actually your analytical innovations would have destroyed everything I'd built. I felt a complex mix of anger and sadness. So you decided to destroy my credibility instead. I panicked when you applied for the Pinnacle Award. For the first time, someone was going to examine our work closely, ask detailed questions about methodology and development processes. Monica's voice grew smaller. That level of scrutiny would expose the truth about who'd actually done the innovative thinking. The formal complaint wasn't panic. That was calculated character assassination. Monica flinched. You're right. I convinced myself that protecting my reputation was worth damaging yours, that your career could recover from one setback, but mine couldn't survive the exposure. What about Vivian, David, all the other people whose work you appropriated? I told myself they benefited from being associated with successful projects, even if they didn't get individual recognition. Monica's justification sounded hollow even to her. I was wrong about that too. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of years of misdirected credit settling between us. What happens now? I asked, finally.
HR is conducting a full review of my project attributions. Depending on what they find, I might face formal disciplinary action. Monica's laugh was bitter. The irony is that I actually am good at client relationships and strategic communication. I just convinced myself that wasn't enough without the analytical innovations too. It would have been enough. Your presentation skills, your networking ability, your talent for translating complex analysis into client strategy, those are valuable contributions. But they're not award-winning contributions. They're supporting contributions. Monica met my eyes directly. I couldn't accept that my role was to help other people shine instead of shining myself. The honesty was startling and painful. For the first time, Monica was acknowledging the hierarchy she'd created in her mind, where strategic leadership mattered more than technical innovation, where being the face of success was more important than being its source. I don't know if we can fix this, I said quietly, professionally or personally. I know. I destroyed your trust along with my own credibility. Monica gathered her purse, preparing to leave. But I wanted you to know that your Pinnacle nomination is deserved. Your work on Morrison was brilliant, innovative, and entirely yours. Thank you. Monica stood, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you for fighting back. It took courage I didn't think you had. After she left, I sat alone in the cafe thinking about courage and recognition and the different ways people define professional success. Monica had been wrong about many things, but she was right about one. Fighting back had required a kind of courage I'd never had to access before. The courage to claim my own accomplishments instead of letting others reframe them. The courage to prioritize professional integrity over family harmony. The courage to step out of someone else's shadow and discover what my own light looked like. In 2 weeks, I would present my work to the Pinnacle Award Committee. For the first time in my career, I would speak about my innovations in my own voice, without Monica's interpretation or presentation layered on top. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. But after 6 years of watching someone else take credit for my insights, I was finally ready to own them completely. The reckoning had cost more than I'd expected, but it had also revealed something I'd never fully understood: the difference between supporting someone else's success and claiming my own. The Pinnacle Excellence Awards ceremony was held at the Grand Metropolis Hotel, its crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across 500 of the industry's most influential professionals. I stood backstage, adjusting my presentation slides one final time, listening to the murmur of conversation that would soon focus entirely on my work. 3 months had passed since the investigation concluded. Monica had resigned from the company rather than face formal disciplinary action, accepting a position with a smaller firm where her client relationship skills were valued, but her project attribution would be more closely monitored. We hadn't spoken since our conversation at Riverside Cafe, though I'd heard from mutual colleagues that she was rebuilding her reputation slowly, more carefully this time. Sayra Chen, the event coordinator, appeared beside me with a professional smile. "You're on in 5 minutes. How are you feeling?" "Ready," I said, surprised to find it was true. The presentation I'd prepared was different from anything I'd given before, not just because of the prestigious audience, but because it was entirely mine. Every insight, every methodology, every strategic breakthrough had emerged from my own research and analysis. For the first time in my professional life, I wouldn't be wondering which credit belonged to me and which belonged to others. Gabriel found me in the final moments before my introduction. Over the past 3 months, our professional relationship had evolved into something approaching mentorship, with him providing guidance on navigating the opportunities that had emerged from my vindication. "Nervous?" he asked, straightening his tie. "Excited," I corrected. "This feels like the presentation I'd been preparing to give my entire career." He smiled, the expression carrying genuine pride. "Your work speaks for itself, Sayra. Just let it." The auditorium fell silent as the moderator approached the podium. Our next presenter is Sayra Chen, nominated for her groundbreaking work in consumer behavior analysis that revolutionized market segmentation for corporate expansion strategies. I walked onto the stage, looking out at an audience of senior executives, industry analysts, and strategic consultants who represented the pinnacle of professional achievement in our field. The spotlights were warm against my face, and for a moment I thought about all the presentations I'd given.
Attended where Monica had stood in similar light, speaking about insights I developed in solitude. The Morrison project began with a simple question. I started, advancing to my first slide. Why were traditional demographic models failing to predict consumer behavior in emerging markets? For the next 25 minutes, I walked through my research journey, the literature gaps I'd identified, the statistical innovations I'd developed, the consumer interview methodology that had revealed psychological purchasing drivers invisible to conventional analysis. The audience was remarkably engaged, taking notes, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated they understood the technical complexity and innovative thinking behind my work. The behavioral clustering framework emerged from recognizing that consumer decisions are driven by psychological needs rather than demographic categories, I explained, showing the visualization that had taken months to perfect. This insight allowed us to predict purchasing patterns with 87% accuracy, compared to 43% for traditional models. A hand shot up from the third row. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Northwestern's Business School leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, can you walk us through the statistical validation process for these psychological drivers? The correlation coefficients you're showing seem remarkably robust." I felt the familiar thrill of discussing technical details with someone who truly understood the complexity involved. The validation required a multi-phase approach. First, I conducted exploratory factor analysis on interview data to identify underlying psychological constructs. Then, I used confirmatory factor analysis to test the structural relationships, followed by predictive modeling to validate behavioral outcomes. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. "That's sophisticated methodology for a practitioner application. Have you considered academic publication?" "Actually, yes. I believe this framework has implications far beyond the Morrison case study." During the remaining question period, I fielded inquiries about implementation challenges, scalability across industries, and potential applications to digital marketing strategies. Each question felt like validation, not just of my research, but of my ability to defend and expand upon it independently. The applause that followed was sustained and enthusiastic, different from the polite recognition I'd received at company meetings. This was acknowledgement from peers who understood that what they'd witnessed represented genuine innovation rather than incremental improvement. As I stepped off the stage, I was immediately surrounded by industry leaders eager to discuss collaboration opportunities. Margaret Chen, a partner at McKinsey, pressed her card into my hand. "We need to talk about consulting opportunities. Your methodology could transform how we approach market entry strategies." "Sayra," Eli pushed through the crowd, his face glowing with pride and vindication. "How does it feel to be the most sought-after person in the room?"
Overwhelming, I admitted, still processing the sudden transformation from background analyst to industry thought leader. 6 months ago, I was invisible at company meetings, and now you're the person everyone wants to hire. Vivian Walsh appeared beside us, carrying champagne glasses and wearing an expression of deep satisfaction. Her own professional vindication had been quieter, but equally significant. She had been promoted to senior analyst with explicit recognition for her Henderson merger work. Congratulations, Sayra. That presentation was absolutely brilliant and entirely yours. The emphasis on entirely yours carried weight beyond polite praise. Vivian understood the psychological complexity of claiming credit after years of having contributions appropriated or minimized. Thank you. I heard about your promotion. Well deserved. Amazing how much more satisfying work feels when your contributions are properly acknowledged. Vivian smiled. It's like the difference between being a ghostwriter and being an author. As the networking reception continued, I found myself in conversations that would have been impossible months earlier. Senior partners sought my opinion on market trends, junior consultants asked about analytical techniques, and several firms extended invitations to speak at their strategic planning sessions. Gabriel appeared during a brief lull, carrying an envelope bearing the Pinnacle Excellence Award logo. His expression mixed professional pride with something more personal, the satisfaction of a mentor whose guidance had proven successful. Before they make the official announcement tomorrow, I wanted you to know privately.
My hands trembled as I opened the formal notification. The words seemed surreal even as I read them. Recipient of the Pinnacle Excellence Award for Strategic Innovation in Consumer Analysis, recognizing groundbreaking methodology that advances the field of market segmentation through psychological behavioral clustering. Congratulations, Gabriel said warmly. This is just the beginning, Sayra. You've established yourself as a thought leader in the field, and that brings both extraordinary opportunities and significant responsibilities. I'm ready for both. I believe you are. But remember, success at this level means people will scrutinize everything you do. Your work will be challenged, your methods questioned, your conclusions debated. The visibility cuts both ways. I nodded, understanding the warning. The protection of anonymity was gone forever. From now on, my professional reputation would be entirely my own responsibility. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the dozens of business cards I'd collected, the consulting opportunities that had been proposed, the speaking engagements I'd been invited to consider. My phone showed 17 unread messages, including interview requests from industry publications and invitations to present at upcoming conferences. My entire professional trajectory had shifted in a single presentation, from supporting player to leading innovator. The transformation felt both thrilling and slightly terrifying. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the award announcement online. Congratulations. You deserved this recognition years ago. I'm sorry it took so long for people to see your brilliance. I'm proud of you for fighting for yourself. M. I stared at Monica's message for several minutes, feeling the complex mix of emotions that her contact always triggered. Her congratulations seemed genuine, but they also carried the weight of everything we'd lost. The sister relationship damaged by professional competition, the family dynamic that might never fully recover from the investigation's revelations. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to bridge the gap that had opened between us. But another part recognized that healing required time and space that neither of us was ready to provide yet. I typed several responses, then deleted them all. Some conversations belonged to the future, when wounds had healed and perspectives had shifted. Tonight belonged to celebrating work that was mine, recognition I'd earned, and a professional identity I'd finally claimed without compromise. The next morning brought the official award announcement and an avalanche of attention I'd never experienced. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from colleagues, interview requests from trade publications, and invitations to present at upcoming conferences. Eli stopped by my office with coffee and a stack of printed articles about the award. How does it feel to wake up famous in your field? Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, I admitted.
I keep expecting someone to realize this is all an elaborate mistake. It's not a mistake. You've been doing award-winning work for years. Now people finally know it belongs to you. The truth of this statement settled over me gradually. The Morrison analysis, the behavioral clustering framework, the innovative methodology that had impressed the Pinnacle Committee, all of it had existed before the investigation, before the confrontation with Monica, and before the public recognition. What had changed wasn't the quality of my work, but my willingness to claim ownership of it completely. That afternoon, I received a call that would reshape my understanding of what recognition could mean. Dr. Sayra Mitchell, a professor at Stanford Business School who'd been in the ceremony audience, had a proposition that went beyond consulting work. Ms. Chen, I've been thinking about your behavioral clustering methodology since your presentation. The theoretical implications are staggering. This could fundamentally change how we understand consumer psychology. I'm listening. I'd like to propose a research collaboration that could establish this as a new academic standard. We're talking about publishing in top-tier journals, presenting at international conferences, potentially rewriting how business schools teach market segmentation. The magnitude of what she was suggesting took my breath away. That sounds incredibly ambitious. Your work represents a genuine paradigm shift, but it needs academic rigor to reach its full potential. Are you interested in that level of commitment? After the call ended, I sat in my office contemplating the path that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I was living in Monica's shadow, accepting that my role was to provide analytical support for someone else's strategic vision. The investigation, confrontation, and eventual revelation had cost me a family relationship I'd treasured, but they'd also given me something I'd never fully possessed: complete ownership of my professional story.